Whether you're new to Football Manager or a more experienced player, I think we can all agree there's a lot to learn in FM, and I don't think there's any one person out there who knows absolutely everything. But there's quite a lot of misconceptions in the Football Manager world, whether that be people saying that they need to stay on for one more game because they're on a winning streak or something else. There's a lot of misconceptions about how FM really works. But in today's video, I'll be covering 3 of the most common misconceptions that even you experienced players might have about the game. Hi everyone, Jake here for FMSCOUT, and as mentioned, today we'll be going through and busting some Football Manager myths. We did this video on FM22 and you guys enjoyed it a lot. In this video, we'll be covering some other myths, so hopefully you'll find it useful and you'll get some enjoyment out of it. If you do, smash the like button for us, subscribe for more, and comment down below your biggest misconception about the game. And thank you again for all the support on the channel since we've came back from the hack. We've now reached 150,000 subscribers, and fingers crossed, touch wood, it looks like we've recovered well from the hack. So thank you guys massively for that. And now let's get in to the first of the 3 common misconceptions about Football Manager. And this one is going to be in the tactics section, particularly when it comes to making your own tactic or tweaking a tactic quite drastically. Now, the myth I'm talking about here is that people think the more complicated and the more nuanced your tactic is, the better it's going to be in Football Manager. And whilst that isn't necessarily completely untrue, actually add in loads of instructions, team instructions, player instructions, there's a good chance that's actually hindering your side for a few reasons, and I'll talk about that now. Firstly, it's all down to tactical familiarity. If I pick 11 players here to play in this tiki-taka preset by picking without restriction, pick best 11, there we go. You will see our familiarity is fairly high. Let's call that about 60-70% on the familiarity bar, meaning that these players can play this tactic at a pretty high level and can follow most of the instructions. This is a basic preset provided by the game, so I would expect this, but what if we started getting a little more intricate with it? Instead of leaving this blank up here, I'm actually going to ask the team to underlap on the left hand side. Just so you know, this is not a good tactic idea, I'm just clicking some buttons. I also want them to be more expressive. When we're out of possession, I'm going to ask them to trap outside and invite crosses in, get stuck in. I'm going to add some individual instructions as well, so the striker, I'm going to want him to tackle harder. I want him to mark the opposition centre back, shoot more often, pass more direct, hold up the ball. I'll ask him to mark tighter as well, why not? And then we're going to hit OK there. You'll see that after adding a bunch of team instructions and player instructions, our familiarity is now sitting at about 50%. It gives you a detailed reason as to why, and obviously I don't think too many people would do this anyway, but piling on this many instructions onto players isn't going to help you all that much in the in-game engine. If anything, it's often going to confuse things, because the more of these instructions that you put on, the greater chance there is that you'll do something that counteracts something else that you've done in your tactic. That might sound quite theoretical, but let's say we're asking people to work the ball into the box, but then in the individual and player instructions, we've asked people to shoot on sight and cross early towards the near post and whatnot. That's obviously going to clash with our in-possession tactics, and sometimes, particularly when you're just getting started with a team, you want to start with the simplest things. You don't need to overcomplicate stuff. It will only make your life harder. As a side note, just to add on to that, you can see if your team cohesion is poor, you're going to have worse positioning in matches, which in turn will affect the way that the team performs on the pitch. So all of these things you should be aware of. Don't feel like you need to add a million instructions to your tactic to make it work. And that is myth number 1, busted. You don't need to have a complicated tactic to be successful in FM. If you've been around this channel for a while and watched a fair few of my videos, you'll know one of my biggest bugbears in Football Manager is people solely relying on the star rating attributes. Now, I know it's easy for people to look at the star rating in Football Manager and assume that's just how good a player is. That's not necessarily true. This isn't FIFA where you have an overall rating and that's just how good that player is. No, the star ratings are actually a fluctuating judgment of how good a player is, but it's not necessarily true. The first reason for that will be the star ratings actually come from someone in your club, their opinion of a player. If we do go to the coach report, you'll see it's coming from our assistant manager, João Dedus. If I go to my staff page and go to my assistant manager, you can see he has a 12 for judging player potential and a 14 for judging player ability. So whilst he might be fairly right about these players, he's not going to be 100% right. The second part is that it's often down to form. If you have a player playing well, you'll often see their star ratings go up very quickly and then drop down when they stop scoring or stop getting clean sheets and whatnot. That's because these star ratings are based on form, but it's not only form. You would think it's all about the attributes and how good a player is. That does come into it, but actually there's other things that these coaches consider a good thing about a player that doesn't necessarily mean they're good at football, if that makes sense. For example, you might see often in coach reports, he's got 3 things here to say basically he was developed at the club or developed in the nation. They're very happy about that because we don't have to register him, and to them that is a pro that affects the average star rating. But of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's better in game. It just means he's easier to register. So don't take this as it being an equivalent of current ability. That is the actual rating of a player in Football Manager, and it's hidden away from you for a reason. You can only see it with the editor. On top of that, star ratings are actually in respect to other players at your club and in your league. So if you put Bayındır here as a player in the 4th division of England, he will be a 5-star player because in comparison to his club and the players in his league, he is much better. The same way you have Joshua King here as a 2.5-star player in the Turkish divisions. If we flew him out to League 2, he'd suddenly be a 4.5-star, 5-star player because in comparison to those players, he's much better. But also, Josh King is being compared here to players like Altay Bayındır and Lincoln, and that is why he's rated so low in our squad, because he's being compared to some of the best players at the club, and that's the same reason as to why it's very hard to get every single player in your squad 4.5, 5 stars each, because they are being compared to each other. So to be able to say that they're all just as good as each other maybe doesn't mean everything that you think it means. So don't focus too much on the star ratings, focus more on player attributes. And as a myth number 2.5, if you want, before we move on to number 3, I want to cover something that I saw the other day that I feel like most people don't know is true, and that is that often when a player is playing well, you will see the green arrows going up to show that a player is developing, which is awesome. All of a sudden though, every now and then, you'll see it actually has some negative arrows, and sometimes that doesn't make sense because you might have a young player who's playing football, who is playing really well in game, so why does it look like his attributes are going worse? Why does he have red arrows? And what I mean by those are the ones that you can see on Lincoln here. Now there's a few key reasons it might be the case. Maybe that player got injured and their physical attributes took a knock, but often it's not actually as bad as you think, and it might not even mean that the player is getting worse. What it might mean is, yes, they're getting worse, but not by a whole attribute. What people don't realise is this upwards arrow and the downwards arrow doesn't mean that the attribute has gone up by 1 or even down by 1. It actually means that it's probably gone up 0.1 or 0.01. Over time, if they keep developing this, it will eventually tick over to 16, and if he kept getting worse in his balance, it would eventually tick down to 13, but this doesn't mean that the attribute has gone up or down just yet necessarily. But I actually saw a post from a guy on the SI forums who works for SI. This was a couple of years ago, so they might have fixed this by now, but what they said is that often when you see that big spike in downward arrows, which don't make sense because a player's developing well, it's actually representative of not the player playing poorly, but actually he's developed too well for the game to handle, and the game then tries to rebalance it by just knocking down his attributes a tiny bit. I'll try and link it in the description down below, the article, and you can read his full explanation. That post will give a really detailed description of what it actually means and what the reasons could be, but all I'm saying is you don't need to panic when you see all of those red lines, unless it continues for a long time. Sometimes it just means a player's development is being rebalanced a little bit, or maybe they've got injured or they're trying to learn a new position and it's not going amazingly well, and therefore the attributes aren't developing as well as before. All I'm saying basically is you don't have to panic too much when you see those red arrows going down. If it continues for a long while, there may be an issue, but if it's just for a week or so, it doesn't necessarily mean your player has got worse at all. The final thing that I want to cover is all about this screen here. On the left hand side where my cursor is moving, we're talking about role suitability and how a low level of role suitability doesn't mean that a player can't play a position well. I know that sounds a bit counterintuitive, but let's take Josh King as an example. You can see here he's got all the different roles he can play as a striker on the left hand side, all of the options, all rated in terms of a star rating out of 5 as to how suitable he is for this role. Now, of course, that is based on attributes. That is one of the things that it's based on, but it's also his familiarity with that role, which a lot of people don't realise. They just assume, oh, he's got 2.5 stars, he has to be an advanced forward. And just as a tangent, I know when I first started Football Manager, when I first made a tactic, I just picked the ones that gave a player the highest star rating. So I'd click this for Ifran Khan here, and I'd pick pressing forward or complete forward for our striker. I wouldn't dare use this player as a ball-winning midfielder. I'd only click on the ones where he had the highest attribute role. You get the idea. I used to just base a tactic off of someone's role suitability. That's certainly not the way to go about it. I just wanted to point that out. But yes, going back to role suitability, them having a low star rating in a specific position, or a specific role, should I say, doesn't necessarily mean they can't play that role well. Josh King here could, in theory, be as good of a complete forward as he is an advanced forward. This is just given as a suggestion as to how well he knows the role and how well suited his attributes are to that position. Chances are, if you play Josh King as a complete forward for 10, 15, 20 games, over time, you'll start to see this climb up the rankings in terms of how suitable he is for the role. You might see it go to 2 stars above a false 9 and target forward. But why is that? It's not like his attributes are getting any better. He's 31 now. No, it's actually because he is more suitable to that role over time. So my biggest suggestion for this wouldn't be to trust these star ratings on the role suitability, going back to these really misleading stars again, and instead trust the attributes in front of your eyes as to whether a player could play a role well or not. If we actually highlight complete forward, you'll see that Josh King has definitely got the physical attributes that he needs. He's a good dribbler, finisher, first touch, his passing technique is fine. His main letdowns are his vision and of course his heading ability, which, yes, is going to take him down in my books as a potential complete forward. But I don't necessarily think that means he couldn't play that role. Arda Güler here as well. He's a 3-star ability, advanced playmaker, ungaunch and attacking midfielder. However, he's supposedly a 2.5-star deep line playmaker, mainly because he doesn't know that role too well. His positioning is weak and a few other attributes, but it was the same in the advanced playmaker section as well. There were some attributes that maybe weren't that great, his decision making for example, and there's a lot more attribute overlap between certain positions than you may think. So basically, to bust the myth, don't always believe that you need a high star rating for role suitability for a player to do well in a certain position. You don't need to do that. Find the tactic and the roles that work well for you. So there you go, everybody. That is 3.5-ish Football Manager myths that I've busted, but I want you guys to let me know in the comments down below your biggest FM myth. And just to let you know what I talked about at the start, there's no such thing as a winning streak or a losing streak in the sense that if you come offline, it will actually affect the game. There's no random dice thrown when you load up Football Manager to decide how well you do. That isn't true. Just wanted to cover that in case anyone thought it was. But yes, there you go, everyone. That is Football Manager myths busted. Hopefully you have enjoyed the video. If you have, smash the like button for me, subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time. Thank you and goodbye.